Hey everybody, it's time for another political shift for president. This time we've got 1960 to 2020. That's a 60-year span, a lot of interesting changes. If you don't want to see all the boring data, there will be a link to the map down below in the description. But if you do want to hear a little bit of background about these elections, here is 1960. John F. Kennedy, he won the election with 303 electoral votes. He carried 22 states, good enough for 49.7% of the popular vote. The Republican was Richard Nixon. He got 219 electoral votes. He carried more states than Kennedy, 26, and in the popular vote, he was just under Kennedy. He got 49.6%. Now, one other thing to mention is the third-party vote in some of the southern states. It does get a little confusing with Southern Democrats and unpledged electors. To make things really simple for this sheet, I just took the Kennedy vote on Wikipedia for each state and used that for the Democratic vote. Now with that said, that was an especially close election with the national popular vote. Kennedy did have a clear advantage on the electoral side, but a lot of states were very close, and you'll see as we go through them. Now comparing that 6 decades later to 2020, not much needs to be said about this election. 306 for Biden, 51.3% popular vote. Trump got 232, 46.8% of the popular vote. We're all familiar with that election, so we're going to see what these shifts are across 15 presidential elections. So here's the usual spreadsheet, whether you think it's beautiful or completely ugly. We've got the states in the first column. Then we have the 1960 Democratic vote, John F. Kennedy. The 1960 Republican vote, Richard Nixon. Then the 2020 Democratic vote, Joe Biden. The 2020 Republican vote, Donald Trump. The next column are the Democratic shifts between these two elections, followed by the Republican shifts, and the last column has the net change between the two parties between the two elections. And of course, I have shading in this column to make it easier to see. The darkest colors are 10 or more point shifts. The lightest colors are under 5-point shifts. So we've got 3 levels of shading on the sheet. And let's get started. Let's head into Alabama. And remember again, some of these southern states, it gets a little unusual. So to make it easy, in 1960, John F. Kennedy got 55.8% of the popular vote. Richard Nixon got 41.7%. Jump ahead to 2020, Joe Biden, he fell down to 36.6%. Donald Trump bumped it all the way up to 62%. That's a net loss of 19.2% for the Democrats, a net gain of 20.3% for the Republicans, and a total net shift of 39.5% away from the Democrats and toward the Republicans. So that's how this works. Let's rapid fire through the rest of these states. Alaska, that shifted toward the Republicans, but by 8.2%. Arizona shifted double digits toward the Democrats, 11.4%. Arkansas, big red shift there, 34.7% toward the Republicans. California, that was Richard Nixon's home state back in 1960. He was a U.S. Senator from there at one point. We know that state has gotten a lot bluer, and it shows 29.7% toward the Democrats. Colorado, similar story, 23.2% toward the Democrats. Connecticut also in that direction by 12.6%, and Delaware by 17.3%. Florida had almost no net change whatsoever, only 0.3% toward the Republicans. Georgia got a lot redder by 24.8%. Hawaii in 1960 was actually an extremely close election. Kennedy won it by under 1/10 of a point, so both of them do show it at 50% rounded. Since then, it shifted 29.4% toward the Democrats. Idaho back toward the GOP by 23.2%. Illinois back toward the left by 16.7%. Indiana went toward the right by 5.6%. Iowa shifted bluer by 5.3%. Same in Kansas by 6.7%. Kentucky got a lot redder by 18.7%. Louisiana had a rightward lurch, shifting a giant 40.4% toward the Republicans. Maine went toward the Democrats by 23.2%. Maryland also in that direction by an even 26%. Same with Massachusetts by 12.9%. Michigan, small change there, 0.7% toward the Democrats. Minnesota a little bit bluer by 5.7%. Mississippi hard right turn there by 28.1%. Missouri by 16%. Montana by 13.8%. Nebraska shifted toward the left by 5.1%. And take a look at Nevada. Both parties lost 1.1%, and that results in 0% net change. I believe if you break it down to the 100th of a point, then it does barely shift toward the Democrats. But down to the 10th of a point, you gotta love the crazy stats where there's no change over 60 years. Moving on to New Hampshire, that shifted toward the Democrats by 14.1%. Same with New Jersey by 15.1%. New Mexico as well by an even 10%. And in New York, also bluer by an even 18%. North Carolina, 5.5% toward the Republicans. North Dakota, 22.4% toward the Republicans. Ohio, a mild 1.5% toward the GOP. Oklahoma, 15.1% toward the Republicans. And Oregon, that went back toward the Democrats by a decent margin of 21.4%. Pennsylvania, small shift there, 1.2% toward the Republicans. In Rhode Island, we would think of that as a blue state today, but that actually shifted 6.4% toward the Republicans. South Carolina also went toward the Republicans by 14.1%. South Dakota by 9.8%. Tennessee by 16.1%. Texas 7.6%. Utah 10.8%. Vermont Nevada, that had the biggest shift out of all the states, used to be a reliably liberal Republican state. Since then, it shifted a massive 52.7 toward the Democrats. Virginia, 15.5 toward the Democrats. Same direction in Washington by 21.6. West Virginia had the biggest shift toward the Republicans. It moved a significant 44.3 toward the right. Wisconsin went 4.4 toward the Democrats. And the last state is Wyoming. That shifted 33.3 toward the GOP. So those are all the states. Washington, D.C. did not vote in presidential elections in 1960, so we don't have to take a look at that. But if you want to apply all this data to a map and take a look at all the shifts, here it is. We've got similar shading, but this time there's 4 levels. The darkest colors are the same 10 or more point shifts. This time the very lightest colors are under 1 point shifts. So we have tilt margins under 1, lean 1 to 4.9, likely 5 to 9.9, and safe 10 or more points. So what are the takeaways from these shifts? Well, I already pointed out how Nevada had no shift whatsoever. That's notable and amusing. But we also have the red shifts in the south. We would expect to see that, as well as the blue shifts on the west coast and in the northeast. And a lot of the margins were very narrow in 1960, many of them only within a point or two. And some of the margins in 2020 were also by a couple of points or even under 1 point. But I always find it especially notable to see which states moved the least across 6 decades when plenty of other states had complete realignments, which ones ended up not moving at all. Now, of course, that doesn't mean during those 60 years they didn't undergo any political changes. Of course, almost every state has done that to some extent, but voting in 2020 in line with how you voted in 1960, that I think is worth mentioning. Along with Nevada, those states would be Michigan and Florida, but there's a handful of other states that only shifted by a point or two, Pennsylvania and Ohio, and then obviously a bunch of other states shifted by 20 to 30 points, and they're completely unrecognizable today to where they were in the 60s. There's always going to be shifts happening somewhere around the country. Sometimes the shifts take a while, sometimes they're much quicker, but a lot of times we're really only able to recognize them in hindsight. It's easy to look back decades and see where the trends are. Sometimes it has a bearing on what's going to happen, sometimes it has no bearing. But personally, I think it's neat to see these shifts across all these years. So I'll leave it there for now. Let me know in the comments. What are the takeaways for you on this map? Maybe it's Kansas shifting blue. Maybe it's Rhode Island shifting red. What do you think about any of the other shifts in any of these states? And what do you think about the 1960 election compared to 2020? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Follow me on Twitter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.